My name is Schroeder. I'm a PhD student at the MIT Center for Constructive Communication. It's really great to see such a full house. I know there's a lot of other competing wonderful talks, so thanks for being here. I hope I can share some interesting insight from some recent work I've been doing about how AI might shape our analyses with some findings that I think are relevant to you all in this room. All right, starting my timer. So I'm a PhD student at the MIT Center for Constructive Communication, which strongly partners with a nonprofit called Sotirakou, which hosts small group conversations, kind of like focus groups or facilitated dialogues, in partnership with community organizations, which are then used as inputs to decision-making for journalists and other outputs. So there are conversation series that happen with education districts, with the New York City Public Health Corps, or as inputs to a big election in fall of 2021 for the Boston mayoral election, for example. So they're semi-structured dialogues with around 4 to 8 people that are recruited from the community whose voices are not usually heard in the civic process, which of course is a lot of work that journalists do as well, is to try to make voices heard that are not always heard. These conversations are often of interest to issues for the community, right? So the New York City Public Health Corps wanted to hear about issues people were having getting access to COVID resources, and there's a big focus on sharing personal experience. So we are sharing this corpus for researchers who might be interested. There were thousands of these conversations, but a subset of them are public for research if you are interested, and I will share a link to that later. But that's going to be kind of the focus of data for this work. So annotation in sense-making. These conversations happen in small groups. More and more conversations happen, and you need some kind of method to detect patterns. And as we were hearing from Julia Angwin, hopefully you want to systematize that and be able to kind of count up the patterns to show your work and figure out how those patterns stack up so that you can then engage in whatever you're going to do next, whether it's journalism, advocacy, decision-making, etc. And in this model of work, the idea is that the community members or the journalists are part of the sense-making that happens after these conversations happen. So what happens is sense makers kind of in an inductive qualitative process determine what themes they want to be detecting across all of the conversation data, and then they're annotating quotes and highlights to detect those themes across all of the conversations. And I probably don't need to say this for this audience, but why might AI be helpful in this? Well, it depends on the scale of data you're looking at, right? This is a really time-consuming, exhausting process. Content can sometimes be triggering or really upsetting, especially for journalists working on certain topics. It takes a lot of time and resources, and annotator consistency varies, especially for novices who might not know how to consistently annotate data. So annotation, as you detect themes, especially if you want humans to be involved in driving that sense-making, often relies on some kind of annotation process. So we can imagine that if we want AI to help in this process, we kind of could have a spectrum of human involvement, right? You could have, on the one end, humans are the sole annotators. On the other end, you're using purely AI-labeled data. And maybe somewhere in the middle, we have this model of human as a reviewer, right? AI can do a first pass, a human will review it, and then we'll have checked our work and kind of can be confident in what the AI has said. Simultaneously, some work that has motivated this is a recent piece that came out in Nature by Zier and Crockett, which basically brings up the issue that AI tools in science and investigative work may risk us introducing analysis where we produce more because it's easier to produce stuff, but what if we actually understand less in that process? And I think journalists are another group of people that care a lot. We don't want to be producing more if we're actually understanding less, so that's another motivating question in this work, which is, do analysts produce more with AI assistance? Do they then understand less? And then how does the analysis change when they're seeing AI suggestions, and how are they incorporating those suggestions? Obviously, this really matters in this context because analysts, sense makers, and journalists often become advocates here, and so they need to have a deep understanding and not just turn over the whole thing to AI. So the basis of this work is a series of conversations from the Fora corpus that happened in partnership with the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene around COVID-19 resources issues. And here's just an exemplary quote from someone who was sharing their vaccine decisions. The first vaccine, I was like, let's do it. The second vaccine, I was like, hold on, but my daughter was scared. The teacher had asthma and died. So the people at my work site, they encouraged me and I got it. This is a story about what convinced someone to get the second vaccine, which is of interest to this organization. So the themes that the sense makers want to be applying here are about the external motivations that this person had. Part of that was family and friends, that's clearly mentioned in the story, and their employer, and it's an example of vaccine hesitancy. So this is the kind of thing we're trying to detect in these conversations so we can make sense of the patterns. And this is a very highly complex codebook or list of themes that folks are trying to detect in this process. So you have this long list of external motivations, long list of intrinsic motivations, as well as pages more that I will spare you. The point here is it's highly subjective and complex, which is a ton of information for a single annotator to process, and it might be a good example of a time when people would want assistance. So I designed an experiment to look at 4 different models of AI assistance in an annotation process. We gave each annotator 20 highlights from the conversation, which is basically a speaker turn, and gave them a chance to label across all of those dimensions, and then we gave them a post-study survey. So in condition 1, we didn't give them any assistance. This is the baseline, basically, and we generated tags from that codebook using GPT-4. Code condition 2 was to give a text-based suggestion, so after they read it, it says here are the suggested tags. Condition 3, we disclosed that those tags came from AI to see if people differentially uptook the suggestions when they knew it was from AI. And then condition 4, we actually pre-highlighted the suggested labels in the interface to annotators, so that can be seen as quite a strong suggestion in comparison to the lighter suggestion. The interface we use is Potato, linked from the Prolific platform. We recruited crowd workers who, again, we can kind of see as novice sense makers who don't have a deep relationship to the data. But at scale, we might learn something about how lay people interfacing with data they don't know very well uptake suggestions. And we have 4,000 annotations in this experiment. So the way this looks, I'll go through this pretty quickly to save time, is the no assistance baseline looks something like this. So again, this is a research prototype, not a gorgeous product or anything. But the highlight is at the top, and then there's a series of multiple choice questions where they check any annotations that apply. So you can already see this is a lot of information to parse, which is why it's a highly complex task. This is the light suggestion, so there are text-based suggestions that happen after, and the annotator has to make a decision, integrating the suggestions and the interface. Here's where we disclose the suggested tags from AI. And then fourth, you can see this is a pretty strong suggestion where the suggested tags are pre-highlighted in the interface. The post measures we had kind of to test some of these measures of understanding. Yeah, oh, okay, thank you. So how well do you feel like you understood this task? How confident do you feel in your answers? How well do you feel you understand the community? And how well could you explain the community's concerns? That's kind of the question getting the most at advocacy right. And these are all self-reports, but we also include some understanding and attention check measures that I'll talk about later. And kind of at a high level, we found it interesting that annotators self-report more task confidence when they have access to AI suggestions. So there's a small but statistically significant increase in the confidence that annotators have when they're looking at these suggested text and pre-highlighted suggestions. And we see this trend actually for understanding, confidence, their understanding of the community, and their ability to explain community concerns. So clearly there's something about this as a scaffold that's increasing people's perceptions of their performance. And again, it's a subjective task, so it's a little bit hard to say whether they absolutely understand the task better. But what we do know, and we included a lot of attention check and understanding questions, which are a little too complex to get into right now, but I can answer questions later about them, which basically showed that these increases did not result in a decrease in annotators' understanding. So they're seeing these suggestions as helpful and accurate. They are tending to like the light suggestion, and we don't see that as coming at a cost to their baseline level of understanding of the task. Interestingly, we actually found that the annotators spent slightly longer on the task when they had AI help. And we didn't get to talk to them, this wasn't a qualitative study, but my hypothesis here is that there's just a little bit more information to integrate, right? They might have an intuition about the way they want to analyze that quote, but then they're like checking it against the other suggestions that are there. So this is, again, maybe a little counterintuitive because we'd see if the obvious finding is that they're over-relying on AI, the idea would be that they would check all the boxes, and they actually have no incentive not to do that on a platform like Prolific, where they have a guided amount of time, but they can still go faster if they want. actually found that the passing of understanding checks did not vary by condition. And this is reassuring. The one in green, it's not a statistically significant lower number, and so this is good because it doesn't show us that they're just like totally checking out as soon as they have access to AI help. They were still passing at about the same rates. The most important finding, though, I think, is that annotators are strongly adopting suggestions. So if you look at this is before I reveal the rest of the graph. This is the baseline level of overlap that the human annotator baseline had with the AI suggestions. Only 40% of the human baseline overlapped with the AI suggestions. Okay. Once people had access to AI suggestions, that jumped over 70%. So they are accepting these suggestions at very high rates. And that might be fine, but it's definitely a cautionary note, right? If these are suggestions that are really good in improving the analysis, okay, but the important takeaway here is that they are really affecting people's perceptions of the same data across different conditions. Okay, great. And a quick takeaway on this as well. We presented these suggestions differently, right, across conditions. And you could decide, so we had 5 annotators annotate every single highlight. And you could decide that 3 out of 5 people need to agree for that to be valid, 4 out of 5 people need to agree for it to be valid, or a full consensus of 5 people need to agree for that annotation to be valid. Clearly, the lower the threshold is that you set, the more people are going to pass into that. But the takeaway here is, again, even when we look at the different levels of threshold that we set for the annotation to be valid, we see that people strongly are influenced by AI suggestions, and the way we present that suggestion also affects how much people agree. So the quick takeaway here, I know this is a complex graph, is that when you give this strong suggestion where it's already pre-highlighted in the interface as a suggestion, you increase the full consensus of 5 out of 5 people agreeing that that tag applies to over 40% when it started at under 10%. So the interface, the way that we actually do sense making with AI, is mediated by the interface we use, whether that's ChatGPT or it's a highly complex, annotation interface like this. So an anecdotal analysis of why I think this matters to journalists is, let's say from this data set you want to know why people didn't vaccinate. You might decide to look at the co-occurring tags with the tag did not vaccinate. And, in the human baseline, stress, fear, and uncertainty is the most commonly co-occurring tag. But in the LLM baseline, it's the number 6 most commonly co-occurring tag. And when you're looking at the humans that were influenced by AI tags, that number drops to number 6. So you might have a different perception of how important family and friends were in people's decisions to vaccinate if you were using AI-influenced decisions on tagging compared to human-only baselines, right? And again, who's to say it's a really context-dependent decision of whether this is good or bad, but suggestion uptake can really affect the downstream analysis you have as a journalist. So the takeaways here, non-experts, analysts, we didn't find they went more quickly. We found that the suggestions were helpful and accurate. They didn't pay less attention. It increased their self-reported task understanding, confidence, understanding of the community, and ability to explain the community's issues. People anchor strongly on these suggestions, and the interface design affects the suggestion uptake. And so basically the takeaway here is that these affect analysis of text even when a human is in the loop. So just because we are putting a human in the loop doesn't mean we're not going to be influenced in ways that matters to journalism. So I would just suggest for journalists, consider the analyst level of expertise, the domain context, the way you interface or order in which you consult with AI suggestions, so maybe develop your own understanding first before going to an AI analysis. And we would love if you worked with this corpus. I would love to field questions and chat about this. This is a working paper that's in progress, but I hope this was interesting, and I don't want to take any more of my co-panelist time. So thank you very much.
Hi everyone, I don't think I need the mic, so I don't want to use it. We came all the way from Greece to present to you our European project. It's called IQ Media Hub, and let me start because I don't have a lot of time. So IQ Media Hub is a knowledge transfer hub. What we want to do is exchange knowledge and train journalists and social media managers and news managers and CEOs on how to use AI effectively and how to use it for trustworthy journalism, let's say. So we are from the University of Athens. We cooperate with Nismata from France, Liquid Media and Kathimerini newspaper from Greece, the Press Association in Portugal, and the Alpha TV station from Cyprus. So we are a consortium from 4 different European countries, Mediterranean European countries. So the IT-Media Hub has 3 pillars. The first one is the Academy that hosts different online courses and workshops, and we have also a different talk every month. After the Academy, then we have 2 newsrooms from different countries collaborate with each other in order to create an innovative project, let's say. Some of those newsrooms will use AI, some others will use data journalism or solution journalism or other techniques of innovation to make something new that they don't already use in their daily practice. And then we have the R&D lab. The R&D lab is what we call like a think tank, where we just sit all together, we invite an expert from outside the consortium, and then we discuss with them the challenges we face. In order for us to actually design a good curriculum for those journalists and media managers, we had a digital transformation survey that we did last year. So in general, digital transformation is a process that aims to improve an entity by triggering significant changes to its properties, blah, blah, blah. So what we wanted from the journalists to answer was, what is digital transformation in these 4 countries, and what they think they need to do in order to transform their businesses, because this is something different. One thing is the term, and another thing is what they think about that. So last year we asked 200 media professionals from 90 media organizations, and then those are the findings. I know I speak quickly, but I don't have a lot of time. So we saw that in the 4 countries we measured, most of the newsrooms use, the basic business model is advertisement. And then we have some of those use sponsored content, and in France and Portugal they also use subscriptions. In Greece, where I'm from, I know that everybody is using, the basic model of advertisement, and this is also something that leads to clickbait. So the term, as the journalists and news managers, think of it, is create and maintain a digital footprint. So I was in Australia and New Zealand, and everybody there said digital transformation is something that we did 10 years ago. We've already, done that. It turns out that in Greece, in Cyprus, in Portugal, and in France, we haven't. So that's why they still think that having a digital footprint is something that they need to do. Also, we have to have a digital transformation strategy in place, implement AI tools and other software in our daily routine, and some other things. Let's go here. Here we have the challenges. And as you can see, the majority said that they are not fully aware of what is available in their, let's say, what AI tools they can use for free or they can pay for the journalism. Then we have older journalists that say that they don't know what to do and where to start from. Some know that there are tools, but they don't know how to use them, and a lot of them don't trust them as well. Here we asked if the newsrooms use data for their audience analysis or for investigation, for data journalism. And as you can see, the majority said they don't use any data. So when we asked them where should the newsroom start from, the majority said we have to ensure that the employees have the required talent and knowledge, then to secure proper funds, Then they also wanted to, bring specialized tools and software into the newsroom, employ specialized officers, managers, developers, software engineers, and so on. And here, okay, maybe my connection isn't good, but you can kind of see what's there. So here we see the differences between the countries in terms of what they think the advantages would be if they actually involve AI into the newsroom. And we can see that the poor countries, let's say Greece here, they think that if we use AI, we will increase clicks and readership. While in France, they think by using AI, we will improve the audience experiences. So we have a lot of differences here, and in the paper you can read that journalists have different opinions than news managers. They think differently of how we will use AI. And if we compare our results with the digital news report, we see that the audience has also different things they expect from AI in journalism. So it's different what journalists think, different what news managers think, and completely different what the readers think. The readers think that AI can actually, make things better, while journalists, use it for more money, let's say. Based on those results, we had some modules. The first one was data journalism. We had Jacopo Taviani help us with data journalism classes. He already done 4 of those classes. Then I come in and I will teach them how to practically use AI for the newsroom. And this is fun because we get to use avatars and other techniques except for ChatGPT because everybody is using it and nobody trusts it in Greece, but yeah, you get the picture. Then we have Kostas Mourlas, who is here, and he will teach the journalists how to design user-friendly and appealing news apps, because this is another matter. You can use AI, you can use all the data, but then you have, to engage with the audience, and this is a completely different thing. So we have this user-centered design course where they will actually learn how to create great news apps. That was it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am MD Misleading Rony, a PhD candidate at University of Maryland, College Park. Today, I'm gonna present our lab's work, Computation Journalism Lab, and the title is Perceptions and Correction of Misleading News Headlines, and we are trying to collect the insights from journalists and news consumers. And my other colleagues are, you can see their name here, so I'm presenting on behalf of them. So let's focus on what actually the problem is. So from the title, you can already guess that the problem is actually around the news headline. So what is the functionalities of the news headline? So we know that it is a summarizer of the news events, and also it also does some work of creating attention among the readers, so that the readers would read the full content. But another function the headline actually does that create the initial impression about the news event. So sometimes whenever we are in a hurry, we may not read the full content of the news. We just leave after reading the headline. So if the initial impression is wrong, then we'll get the wrong idea about the news event, or sometimes we can be even misinformed. And also there's another work from Ecker et al. Who shows that even though after reading the full content, our initial impression can be still hold. So it is important to have the correct impression after reading the headline. So let's look at an example of this headline. So one morning you are having your morning coffee and suddenly you come across this headline that hot tea linked to the increased risk of esophageal cancer. So if you don't read the full content, you may think that, oh, I'm in danger. I don't want to take tea anymore. Okay. So, but if you read the full content, you can see that it is not the problem with the tea, but the temperature of the beverage you are taking. Like anything temperature over 65 degree hot beverages can cause the esophageal cancer. Not only the tea is responsible, the hot coffee can be also responsible for this type of cancer. So, but all the poor tea has to take all the blame from you. So this is one kind of misleading headline. And let's say another headline here, like how waking up early in the morning to exercise could actually be counterproductive. So you think of that, oh, I don't want to wake up early in the morning and I'm not going to the gym or doing some exercise anymore. But the main content is say that cutting sleep in order to hit the gym. So if you don't have enough sleep and you just wake up in the morning and go to going to hit the gym, it may be counterproductive, not taking the exercise. So this type of headline, which creates actually the wrong impression, they are not clickbaity in terms of that they are not forward referencing like this common morning beverage could be a silent killer. You should avoid this. They are not creating such kind of sensationalism, and also they are not factually false. They are not outright false or fake, but they still have some component to misguide you or misinform you, and that's the thing we are currently discussing, and we term this phenomenon as the misleading news headline. And we strongly believe this misleading headline, there are another variant of misinformation like fake news, clickbait, sensationalism, etc. But we define these misleading headlines with the help of the definition proposed by Wardell et al. In her work. It has a strong connection with the false connection. So what false connection do? It actually create a weak connection between the content and the headline or the title. Sometimes the headline and the image of the news event, or sometimes the news content that do not match each other, and there creates a false connection. And we took the help of this false connection idea to define the misleading news headline whenever the news headline does not match with the news content properly, so that it can create a wrong initial impression and misinform the people. So we believe that misleading news headline as a misinformation has the similar kind of impact on media ecosystem and also on news readers' mind, but it is not familiar like other misinformation like fake news and rumor. But so it would be interesting to explore that how people from both spectrum, like the news producers and also the news consumers, how they perceive this problem, how they react to this problem, and how they want to correct those problems. Because it is a very subjective problem, so we have a very big research goal, like how people, from understanding how people perceive it to solve it. So we have divided the overall research goal in separate projects, but this is the combination of 3 projects. But in this work, we have just focused on the first part, like understanding the misleading news headline, and in the subsequent part, we have the application and implication of how people like to correct a misleading news headline to news headline. And also we want to explore how technical solutions, like the modern technical solutions like LLM, can help us in identifying and correcting those misleading news headlines. So the first part is of this project is understanding the misleading news headlines. So this is our overall goal, like we want to explore that how people from both spectrum, like the news producers and news consumers, they define or react to misleading news headlines, and if they have given chance to correct a misleading news headlines, how they would like to correct it, or what strategies they would like to follow to solve or correct a misleading news headline. Because we believe that it can provide an understanding of public interaction with misleading news headlines. So, keeping the goal in mind, we have set 2 research questions which has some sub-research question as well. For example, first one is how do journalists, as a news producers, they perceive crafting potentially misleading news headlines. and the second one is how does news consumers, as a general readers, they perceive the misleading news headlines. Similarly, we have the second research question that is related to correction of misleading news headlines, like what corrections do journalists provide for misleading news headlines, and what corrections do consumers suggest for misleading news headlines. So to solve these, to answer those questions, we have designed a full study. So the first one is to collect some relevant articles. So we explored 12 news articles. 6 of them are 12 news sources. 6 are reliable and 6 are unreliable. And we tracked some articles from March 31st, 2022 to backward. And 3 authors combinedly collected 60 news articles from different sources. And after some kind of exploration, like the way they collect the articles, that they read the headline first and they write down their initial impression, and then they read the full content and try to find out whether the content match with their initial impression or not. If they don't find them any matching, they identify them as the misleading news headline, and then they also write down their explanation that why they find the headline is misleading. So we actually do some thematic analysis on the expression generated by the annotators, like why they find the headline misleading, and try to find out the most prominent techniques used for making a headline misleading. And we come up with these 8 categories. They are not the exhaustive one because we didn't have collect many articles, but this is the most prominent one we have found in our data set. And in the next part of the study, we conducted the semi-structured interview with the 12 journalists and 12 news readers. And for them, we created an article pool from each of the categories we have mentioned before. And in the interview of the journalist, we provide them 4 news articles, 4 news, 4 of them, 2 of them are misleading headlines, with misleading headlines, and 2 of them with non-misleading headlines. So the interview procedure was that they have read the headline first, they then discuss what is their impression, and they read the full content, and also they discuss whether they find it misleading or not, which of the component of the article makes them believe that the headline is misleading or not. And also for the journalist, we also ask them their newsroom practice, like how they craft the news headlines and which component or which process in the news production they believe that can make a headline goes wrong, like make the headline misleading as well. So after collecting their interviews, we do the same procedures for like the thematic analysis. We followed all the steps of thematic analysis. So here are the findings. Let's quickly go over the findings here. Like what is the perception of misleading headlines? So we explored this question from different perspectives. The first one is defining misleading headlines, like how they would like to define the misleading headlines. So the first one is that some participants can identify misleading news headlines, and also identify the main concept, like mismatch between the headline and content. But most of them actually term them with other terminologies like sensationalism and clickbait, or whenever they think that the headline is biased, they term them as the misleading headlines. So we can see that they don't have any clear concept of the misleading news headlines, but they have the idea like fake news, bias, or any other term like sensationalism to define the misleading news headline. And for the reactions, we can see that the reactions are similar to other kind of misinformation, like they feel anger, they feel disappointment, and this is kind of emotional reactions they're shown. The other one is trust and credibility issues. Some participants say that they might not return to the news website again if they fall the victim of the misleading news headlines, and also some offer immediately leaving the page. And one interesting finding from this trust and credibility issues, some participants say that even though they are angry with some news website, but whenever they will see their favorite news websites is reporting again, they might return to the website again. So they showed some kind of leniency to their favorite website, news websites also. From perceptions of misleading headline from journalism perspectives, so there is always a tension between the journalism practice to make the headline engagement attractive, but they are, at the same time, some journalists also say that they tried their heart and soul to make the headline as accurate as possible, but sometimes all of the things they are not in their hand. For example, most of the headline now are highly influenced by the techniques like SEO, like they write down their news content, and the editor and SEO team modified it in a way that can make more engagement, or also that can come up with in the search engine. And also some newsroom also report that they have some strict guidelines to make the headlines so that they can avoid the trap of misleading headline. So in terms of the correction, like what correction strategies they like to offer, so we found some categories like adjusting language and tone in a way that they not create the misinterpretation. Also, the participants focus highly on to keep the content aligned with the headline, and they ask for more context when in the headline. And the last one is using opinionated level, because sometimes they couldn't identify which headline is the factual headline and which one is an opinionated piece, so they can difference between them, and that can create the misinterpretation. So this is the main takeaway, that people are unclear about the difference between the clickbait, sensationalism, and misleading news headlines. Participants express frustration and disappointment like other form of misinformation, and there is a recognized tension between creating engaging headlines and the maintaining the accuracy. And influential technologies like search engine optimization need to be investigated deeply to examine their impact on make the headline misleading. And also, this problem is highly subjective, so there is a call for a technical intervention which can focus on this subjective matter as well. Thank you for listening.
Great. Hi everyone, my name's Jessica. I'm a PhD student in the Media, Technology and Society program at Northwestern University, and along with Nick Diakopoulos, we've been exploring how to label AI-generated content with a specific focus on matching journalist intentions with audience expectations. I come from a media psychology background, so I'm very focused on how audience perceive AI labels. Very quick overview. I'll speak a little bit about trends and uses of generative AI in the newsroom. Previous panelists have already spoken about this, so I'll go through it a bit quickly, but with a focus on how audiences are thinking about that. I'll also talk about labeling as a transparency strategy and the opportunities and limitations around that, and then a little bit about emerging best practices, suggestions, and remaining questions. Don't get bogged down in all the details here, but basically the graph on the left is what people think journalists use AI for, and copy editing comes up a lot, translation, data analysis, and then when you map that to the level of comfort with these uses, people tend to be pretty comfortable with using AI for copy editing, but maybe things like data analysis, there's less comfort in that. Or things like writing headlines with AI assistance, there's more comfort when they know that a journalist is involved in this human review, but a lot less comfort when there's no human review. So I'll speed through this a little bit, but this is just kind of to map what people think journalists are using it for and how comfortable they are with those uses. We've spoken a lot about what AI can do and how it can be used as a tool and how that can be very effective, but there are some concerns about using AI in the newsroom. One of the big ones is information integrity. When we're very reliant on generated content and automated decision making, it can kind of just proliferate biases. Realistic content and misinformation is always a concern. Epistemic harms, hallucinations, so a lot of things that I'm sure people in this room know. But a big part of it is also audience relationships, specifically journalists and their relationships to their audiences, where there's been reports recently of a lot of anxiety, a lot of mistrust, mostly and very often because people are just unsure why journalists are using AI. They say, well, it's a journalist's job to write the content, so why are they relying on AI suddenly? It makes me mistrust why this is happening, and there's just uncertainty about journalists' motives around the use of AI. Some studies recently have also found that when you put an AI-generated label on content, whether it was created by a human or entirely by AI, if it's actually, if it's factual or if it's false, it doesn't matter, it's perceived as being less accurate. And so there's kind of this trade-off where you're trying to be accountable, you're trying to have transparency into your work, but putting that label on lowers the perceived accuracy from audiences' perspectives. So given these concerns, it's really important to anticipate how audiences might react to the use of AI with the goal of maintaining trust and accountability from the journalist side. And labeling as a transparency strategy has been suggested to do this. It's gaining a lot of traction, especially after things such as the AI Act, but it's proliferated into various different industries and definitely into the newsroom as well. It's different from maybe indirect disclosure, such as watermarking, because this is where people actually interact with content. Direct disclosure is the interaction point where audiences are finding out, okay, AI has been used in some way. And the presumption around labeling is that it's going to empower users, empower readers to think more about the content, maybe ask additional questions, but that's an assumption. Some quick examples of what this can look like. The first one is actually from Hoodline, if anyone's familiar with what happened when they are using AI in the newsroom and the backlash that that caused. It's an interesting case, but just an example of what this can look like. It can be a small little AI icon. You know, how big should that be is still a remaining question. Maybe it's a percentage. 63% of the content was created using AI. But how do you quantify something like that when you're not just talking about writing the actual text? Maybe it's data analysis, maybe it's background research. How can you quantify how much AI did if you're not only talking about the final product? Labeling visuals can also be done in different ways. On the left is how Meta is approaching this. It says made with AI. The middle is the New York Times, generated by AI. The one on the right is TikTok, AI generated. These all give very different attributions to what AI did. If you say made with, generated by, and you can see that different platforms and different organizations, it looks completely different. So potential concerns with that is that if there's no uniformity with what these labels look like, there will be no uniformity in terms of how readers interpret that information. So it can just have very, very different meanings to different audiences that don't align with what journalists intend for those labels to mean. Also, by simply saying that something has some sort of AI generation in it, doesn't tell you whether the information is good or bad. It tells you nothing about the quality of the information. Other potential concerns, and we've seen this with things like fact-checking and labels in other domains, is that people get very fatigued. They kind of just stop seeing the labels, or it stops making sense to them, it stops meaning something. So putting a label on everything could definitely lead to label fatigue, and how much is too much. A last potential concern I want to mention is that although there might be really good intentions, as I've mentioned, it could still miss the mark and reduce trust instead of increasing it. Reduce accountability, reduce reliability, even if the intentions are really good. Overall, there is just no consensus of what these labels should look like, how often they should be placed, what they should mean, how they should be communicated. And Benjamin Toff recently said that people feel really strongly about the need for disclosure and wanting to avoid being deceived, but at the same time, there's no consensus around how much or precisely what this disclosure should look like. So audiences want disclosure, they don't want to feel like they're being deceived, but there's no answers really of how to do that. So the big questions that remain are when to label, what to label, where to place the labels, what level of specificity do you provide, and most importantly, how do you convey and communicate this information to audiences? Some emerging best practices, and this is kind of a compilation from various different organizations that have been looking at this, very importantly is visible human oversight. Not allowing people to think that AI just completely wrote this whole article or this piece of content and the journalist is somewhere else and they just press send. So working very hard to avoid that interpretation could be helpful, as well as a visible commitment to accuracy. So journalists saying, like, we've checked this, it's rigorous, it's accurate, as well alongside like an ethics statement, and also maybe sharing motivations. Why are you using AI? that can be quite insightful to audiences, that they just have an understanding of how you're using the tools. As well as meaning, explaining what labels mean, why they're being provided, and being consistent in those applications of the labels, as well as communicating changes that might come along. I'll talk about that on the next slide as well. AI literacy. I've mentioned audiences a lot, but understanding your audience's expectations and perceptions of AI use could potentially help guide the implementation of how you disclose AI use to them, and modifying labels to increase alignment with those expectations and perceptions, and kind of having continuous feedback. And adapting to changing guidelines, both in your organizations or maybe in the legal system, as we saw with the AI Act. Audiences' needs will definitely change, especially as they become more accustomed to AI and they understand more of what it does. Maybe right now, copy editing is a little bit scary to people, like what does that actually mean? And in the future, they're like, oh, it's fine if you're using it to write things or edit things. So maybe those uses will become a bit different, or those transparency strategies will have to be responsive to that. And something I didn't really get to talk about much, but the context and the medium will absolutely change what the answer to this is. Adjustment across mediums. We didn't even get a chance to talk about audio, but what if you use AI synthetic voice? What does that mean? What if that's taken out of context and shared and then there's no label? So just thinking about adjustments across mediums, and also topic and context nuances. You can imagine if it's more of a contentious political topic and people think AI was involved in the writing, they're going to have different reactions than if you're synthesizing the latest sporting event and it's just data analysis that AI was used for. So just wanted to highlight those. So overall takeaway is kind of finding this middle ground between journalistic intentions and audience expectations and interpretations of labels. So for next steps, I'm planning to conduct interviews with people and really go deep into what does this label signify? What are the cues? What does this mean to you? What do you expect? And what else do you still need to know? How much information is too much? How should this be communicated? So finding ways to get into the nitty-gritty details. And if you're asking similar questions in your organizations, or if you're interested in collaborating, please get in touch.
Thank you. We have 4 minutes for questions. So, yeah. And can I ask the presenters if you want just to be honest?
Sure. Thank you. My question is for both. Can we go back to your example of trying to find information about why people do this interaction? And I'm wondering about the fidelity in the data that you collect in that model where you're interviewing people and then tagging it, versus say something like a poll that we can do. Well, how would you sort of characterize the fidelity of the data in those different circumstances?
It's a great point. So this is what I see as kind of like a qualitative study that wasn't meant to be representative. It was to elicit personal stories and experiences. So certainly if you want to use the data to make a decision that is supposed to be representative of people in a democracy, probably something like the evidence from a poll is going to be more appropriate. But if you're looking to try and understand people's motivations or the relationship to their resources, their stories can be quite insightful. And so, yeah, I agree that this did not vaccinate. We can have reasonable questions about whether you can fully reveal or make decisions based on the data that's there. But it just kind of depends on the intended context for its use. I just like that example because I think it gives you an example of how there could be a downstream consequence if you were to use that as an input to decision making. Yeah.
Hi, I have a question for Jessica. I have several, but we don't have time. But to what extent do you believe that users or news audiences would actually make use of these transparency options? There is much research showing that people say they're interested in transparency, but are not. How do you...
Yeah, that's the exact tension of people want disclosure. They don't want to feel like they're being deceived. They don't have a lot of trust to begin with. But then when you actually give them a label, it's overwhelming. It doesn't mean anything. It lowers trust. So it's kind of it's the big tension that that people are finding in the research so far. And that's why I hope actually talking to people and saying like, would this make a difference if this was implemented? Hopefully people will be honest with their responses. And then maybe it's just like a, I don't know, like a read here for more information. If people want to do that, at least it's there. But maybe it doesn't trigger that response of, okay, I don't trust this anymore. So there's definitely a tension there.
I have a question for who. In your experiments, were you able to test it with the sample, create a test case where the AI is giving false examples? Where does that change the person's opinion, or does that people still agree to AI's false examples or AI's biases?
That's a great question. Thanks for the question. We do get questions about this, like the adversarial case, and whether that those examples would also be uptaken. I think you need a different experiment design, because then you're also going to have people over time distrusting the examples more and more, which is measuring something a little bit different. So this is a very important question, because clearly people are seeing these suggestions as helpful and accurate overall, which maybe give them also a reason to keep trusting it. But as soon as you mix in those adversarial examples, I think you need a little design, because the distrust of the whole system might affect your downstream results. But great question, thank you.
And we are 1 minute before finishing the session. One final question then.
For Andy, have you guys, I didn't see any computational kind of component, and I didn't know if you guys have been testing like your findings against computationally or automatically generated headlines, or if you're going to test any of that kind of stuff. Can you talk a bit about that?
So the technical component is to employ the technologies like large language model to identify whether they are successfully capture the misleading component from the headline or not. So we did run some pilot study and did some comparison between different kind of large language models. So far we found a good result of ChatGPT with ChatGPT 4, which has around 80% accurately identified the headline is problematic in terms of, with relevant to the content. So we are hopeful, and we will also explore that rather than identification, we want to explore their explanation power. Like even though they can identify it correctly, what explanation they can give us, like if it is exhaustive, correct, or complete in terms of human judgment on what.
Thank you, everyone. That's all the time we have, and I hope all